Table Talk, an open and honest discussion about different topics related to faith.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Table Talk. Thank you for coming and joining us and taking a seat at the table here with us this evening or this afternoon, whatever time it goes up. Come on. I feel like I want to restart that because you both laughed. Both of you did.
That.
Oh gosh.
Some good news. It's like, good morning, even though it's clearly the afternoon.
Okay.
But you can do it. Who cares? Time's not a thing anymore.
Okay. I say we just leave it in. All right, let's go for it. Please join us. Take a seat here with us as we talk about different topics of our faith and have some different opinions and different things that are discussed here. This week I am joined by a BHS senior, Kendall Kirk, and Tim with a Y, aka Melanie Hairston. And this week we are talking about the views that the world has on the church. So this week we're going to start off with a dumb question. So it's going to have nothing to do with the topic that we've decided on, but it's going to just shake out some nerves. Y'all ready? Cool. So you can have one detachable body part. What would it be and why? You said you had a great answer for this, so I'm excited.
Your ears. Because if you're in a loud place and you can just like hand your ear to the person talking to you and understand each other clearly. What?
I don't know if your ear, well,
if it still works, I think it's good.
So, I feel like you would just have, I don't know if you know how an ear works, but like the way that it's shaped, directs the sound into your ear. So you might just be hearing everything just mumbled more. I don't know the rules of this.
If
It's
all
just
the laws of nature, then the ear would still work.
okay. So the ear's still.
We're making up the rules.
We'll go with that. Fine.
Well, if your arm's away from your body,
Well, yeah,
your
that
arm
changes.
is still working. Your ear.
I don't know the rules to this question, if it's working or not. Who knows? We can have it
I
work.
like my answer.
All right, cool. Melanie, how about you?
Well, yeah, it might. Does it still work? Because that changes
Sure,
my
that's what
thing.
we're going with,
Yeah,
apparently,
okay,
right?
Cool. If
Yeah,
it
it
still
still
works,
works.
you take your arm off, and then when you're short, you can still grab things because you can use it as like a little claw thing. So you save money because you don't have to buy the little claw thing. So you know.
I think Tim feels offended by that. All right, anyways, I guess I could answer, but I don't really know. Probably. Yeah, probably my arm. I'd probably go with my arm. I think my arm. I'm already pretty tall, so I can reach things on a top shelf.
That's great.
But like reaching things far away. But then you could just get one of those little claw things. And,
But you save money.
Yeah.
yeah, but
That's
they can't possibly be
very
that
frugal.
expensive, can they? Like
But if you lose it,
$5?
or you're like not carrying around with you,
Lose your arm.
no, your arm's always with you.
Okay.
If you lose the little claw thing,
Okay. Sure.
or you're not carrying it
Whatever.
around, your bag's not big enough. Can't have metal
Back's
objects.
up.
Got it, your arm. It's ready to go.
All right. Fine. I'll accept it. Anyways, what are some things that the world perceives of the church? What are some things that people outside of the church believe about us, regardless of whether they're true or not?
Small-minded hypocrites.
Yeah, not relevant at times. Judgmental. Yeah, small-minded at times.
You're closed-minded too.
So, what are some of the positive aspects that people have of the church? What are some things that maybe we're doing right, other than the wrong that we see of closed-mindedness or hypocritical?
Say, like, reaching out to communities, like, with, like, food bank type things, or events for children, like VBS or Kids in Play, where it's providing, like, that service or a need.
Yeah, like the Christmas programs we do where we send out toy boxes and different missions around the world. I think those are viewed as pretty good most of the time, as well as like groups we support too.
I think one of the essential, big word now, things that at least one church does is City Church Amarillo. We used to go there and do mission trips, but they do lunches all week during the summer and provide lunches to kids who don't normally have a way to get lunch outside of school. So that's a pretty essential, positive thing that I see that a church can do for a community. And yeah, things like VBS and We Do Kids and Play, that people outreach to communities.
Yeah, filling those gaps in like certain areas.
What aspects of Christianity are kind of moving into culture? We see things like Kanye's new gospel album. We see things like movies having references to God. I Can Only Imagine was recently in kind of the mainstream of, Mercy Me made this amazing song, and it moved past just Christian radio stations and all these things. So how are things in Christianity that we're making moving into culture and shaping the way that culture reacts and that culture takes things in?
Well, you mentioned Kanye's album. So like music, another one is like Lauren Daigle. Her Who Says was really big, like throughout all stations and stuff, not just Christian stations. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. I didn't think about her at all.
You're going to want to speak up a little.
I know. I just don't, my brain.
Yeah. I know for another music one, this is probably going to be a lot of music from me if I make any references, but NF is a big Christian rapper. He doesn't really rap about God specifically like a typical Christian rapper, but he is a Christian, and he went on tour either last year or the year before with Logic and with Super Duper Kyle, and that was a pretty mainstream like concert, and having someone who was still representing Christianity was cool to see at a concert where you wouldn't typically think to see that.
It's like with that, like, I don't know, I think I'm just confused by the question. But like when, like, kind of picking and choosing, but like when celebrities at awards are like, oh, now I'm going to thank the Lord, and like bringing that in, and kind of using it as like a prop up at times, but like even Chris Pratt like was able to use like that platform and just say like, hey, I believe in the Lord, here's what I think like the gospel is, and things like that. But like seeing it in like those award show glory, like, hey, the Lord got me here, look at what I'm doing. But I don't know if I answered that right.
It's fine. I do think we see a lot of times like the sincere, like, I thank God for putting me here, like with Chris Pratt. I believe that Chris Pratt is sincere when he talks about it, but I think that there's a lot of other celebrities that when they receive awards and they say, oh, I thank God for putting me here, that in their day-to-day lives they don't really have anything to do with God, and that it's just maybe a casual acquaintanceship with God and not that relationship like we tend to build and that we tend to believe in. So any other thoughts, any other examples, any other things you can see Christianity moving into culture? Anything? If not, we can move on. It's a yes or no.
I mean, I'm sure there is. I just
like,
all right, I mean,
like whenever it goes into lawmaking and stuff,
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of morals that come from like biblical theology and stuff like that.
Yeah. Valid point. I didn't even think about that, honestly. I was thinking more of like movies and TV and stuff like that, but that is a good point of we can't really separate the church and state, I guess, when it comes to moral beliefs. That's not what I'm trying to preach here. You look uncomfortable. Anyways, we'll move on. So on the inverse of that, how do we see churches taking in aspects from the culture to, try and keep things hip or fresh, as the kids say? So how do we see churches, I guess adapting could be a good word to use, of how do we see things coming in that we weren't seeing a few years back?
I think especially now, like with your social media platforms and just like utilizing those, so like with Instagram or now like TikTok pastors, or like using YouTube channels and things like that.
Yeah.
But where it's not necessarily like a bad, like I don't know, sometimes I think we have the idea that it's a bad influence that culture puts on the church, but at times there's like where it's very beneficial. Obviously we're all streaming our things right now. Thanks.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think clothing is a big part of it, because like I guess whenever I was little going into church, it was always like you have to dress really nice for church, whereas now like most of, at least youth group, we come in and there can be days where we might come in our pajamas, like stuff like I've definitely come in pajamas, so I don't know if that's accepted, but I do it, so.
I don't think I don't have an issue with it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't think God would be mad that you came in your pajamas. Yeah. Any other thoughts? I mean, you kind of touched on it being good or bad, and that was the next question of, is it bad that we kind of use the culture to get to people and convince people to come into the church and almost trap them and suck them in? Is that a way that we would see that? I mean, playing devil's advocate. Playing devil's advocate. Do we kind of coax people to come in by using some hip things? Like, I mean, different churches do different things, like for sermon series and things like that, or that are like using mainstream things to kind of convince people to come and sit in, and maybe you can sneak some Jesus in and convince them to stay and come back next week. So is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
I don't think it's bad, because like they can leave if they want to. Like sounds like a cult.
Okay.
Oh God. Like, I'm gonna leave that there.
Oh, please continue. Go for it.
So you're saying you don't think it's...
Yeah, it's all their decision. Like, they can come if they want to. It's not forced upon them.
And at the same time, I think, like, if we're using things, like, other than Jesus, then, like, are they coming for Jesus, or are they coming for that bonus thing? And, like, yeah, sure, they can leave, but, like, when they leave, like, we wanted them to, like, experience the Lord. And so I think, like, if we're bringing people into the church and their focus isn't Jesus, then their focus isn't going to be, like, I don't know, like, the way you bring people in, I think, is the way that, like, they end up staying. Or it's like, if you brought them in on entertainment, then entertainment's expected for the rest of the time. And, like, to be like, oh, well, now that we're done entertaining you, we want you to serve. Like, there's this really hard, like, okay, cool, I know this is how we got you here, but that's not really what we want you to do now that you're here. And so I think it does, like, really cheapen, like, who the Lord is. Like, it's not Jesus. Like, we say it, like, all the time of, like, it's not Jesus plus, but yet that's how we evangelize. It's like, oh, but it is Jesus plus when we want you in our doors. But when we want you to experience the Lord, it's not Jesus plus. And so there's just a lot of mixed signals in that. So I think there can be a downside to, like, how we use our influence and whatnot.
So some churches have even begun opening bookstores, opening coffee shops. There are a few churches that have even gone into bars and selling alcohol within the church. Are these things that maybe are too far, or are they the right strategy? Maybe are they stepping away from what the Bible tells us the church is supposed to look like? What are your thoughts on having different avenues to bring people into the church for things like that?
I like the coffee shop idea. I like coffee. The bar thing is kind of a little overload, I think.
In what way?
What way? Like, I definitely don't think churches usually preach, like, oh yeah, come have some alcohol with us. Unless it's communion. Just kidding.
So we'll have the bar for communion.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, again, like, I think, especially with the bar aspect, I don't
Yeah.
know, like, where again, it's like mixed signals of like, yes, in scripture, like, drinking itself isn't this sin, but like the drunkenness is. But then there's people where like, even says like, if this causes someone to stumble and things like where like a new believer who might be struggling with alcohol is seeing that, and it's just right there in like your church home where you're like, this is supposed to be a place where like
Like a safe place.
yeah, and that this is like a trigger for me right here, and like it's like those are dueling things. So yeah, I had a thought in like,
Okay. I mean,
We'll
we
go
can-
back.
we can move on to another question if you want me to.
I'll circle back around and we'll
Okay.
dump it in.
Okay.
I don't know how it works.
All right. So another thing I was just kind of thinking on, that a lot of times Christians are shaped in a poor light when it comes to TV shows or movies, or even sometimes in music. You can't really see it, but you can hear it. And sometimes Christians are shaped as super hypocritical people who are judgmental. Sometimes we're kind of shaped as naive idiots. Sometimes we're shaped as people like, I'm watching through Community right now on Netflix. It was just added. I've always wanted to watch it, but there's a lady on there who's supposed to be a Christian, but she's super like a guilt monster. Like, she'll guilt you into doing whatever she wants you to do, and if it doesn't fit with whatever God tells her to do, then she'll guilt you into it and she'll make you feel bad about it. And I think a lot of the times culture can shape a lot of people's thoughts on, you know, how Christians are as a people, and whether that's contrary to who we believe we are or not. Do we do anything when people do come into the church? Do we do anything to directly oppose that thought, that we're not hypocrites, that you know, we have beliefs and we stand firm on them, but we're not trying to judge, and we're not trying to be hypocritical to you. We're not naive, and we know that things are happening in the world. But do we do anything when new Christians or new people are trying to step into the faith? Do we do anything to counteract that thought of, you know, Christians aren't high and mighty, aren't above everybody else? Do we do anything for that? Or do we play into the hands of people who think that? Like, I know there have been cases, for me specifically, I've had atheist friends who have gone to churches looking for a reason to say these Christians aren't living the way that they claim to be. And some of them have found the reasons they're looking for, some of them have found pleasant surprises. But do we, as a church, as Alsbury, as even specifically moving down into our youth group, when we have people who bring friends in that wouldn't normally come to church, do we show them that we aren't hypocritical, we're not trying to push them away, that we're open and we're inviting?
I think so. I remember me coming into youth group, quite a few people coming up to me and just like making sure that everything for me was going well, and trying to make me like get included. Like, they wanted me there and they wanted me included. And I think I definitely try to do the same thing, remembering back on those people that did it for me.
I think again it comes down to like, how seriously are you or are students taking their own faith, and not just saying like, oh, because they're in the church building they're a Christian, and like judging it based on that. But like, if a student is really taking their faith seriously, like they're going to be like not monitoring, like evaluating, like, okay, the Lord has these like what am I trying to say, or like your life is going to display fruit, like if you're really following the Lord. And so I think a lot of times what happens is we come across as hypocritical is when we're not really taking that faith seriously. So like, yeah, we're talking a lot of mess, we're talking a lot of talk, but our actions aren't following that. And so I like where like you see that hypocritical like idea is when we're not taking our own faith seriously. So kind of like that self-check of, if I want to counteract this thought for people, like, yes, like, we're not going to be perfect. There are going to be times where, like, yeah, I want this, but it's not going to, like, so it's going to seem, I know that did not sound great. Like, you want, like, this certain result, but we are still human. It is a fallen world, so at times you are going to look hypocritical, but the more that you're, like, that self-evaluation, I hope it makes sense.
I think you were saying,
Yeah, and I think every person that comes into a church isn't perfect, and that everyone has their own struggles. And I think that sometimes outsiders might see a person and recognize their struggles over their faith too.
Yeah. So another question, kind of off the cuff again, on the topic of using our struggles. Do we, as a church, whether that's Alsbury or whether that's we talked in the first episode about the universal church of everyone, do we kind of allow our struggles to connect with people that are coming in off the streets? Do we allow the culture in that way that we're the same, of we struggle with the same things? I struggle with depression and anxiety, and I have shared a lot with some friends who aren't Christians and have shared the same things as me, and not to say I'm like pushing them into church or anything, but we share that connection, and it allows us to move into deeper connections and talk about God. But when people come into church, do we just put up a facade and say everything's all hunky-dory? That felt weird to say.
I'm gonna start using that.
Do we just put up a wall and just pretend like, here in the church everything's perfect, everyone's all smiles, and everybody's kissing babies and shaking hands, and
running for office.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you run for office, you're trying to pretend to be perfect. But do we allow ourselves to connect with the people that come in? Do we allow ourselves to connect with that side of the culture of, there's people who are struggling just the same as us. They just don't have the gift of Christ yet. When they come in, do we share that, or do we push it to the side and pretend like it's nothing?
Like when they're coming through the door the first time, I'm not like, hey, guess what?
Yeah. I'm not saying that. We like throwing it in their face I have depression. I'm not doing that. But are we allowing ourselves to share in those struggles with people who, are struggling and are looking for answers and looking for maybe not really an outlet, but looking for something where they can have a connection and maybe put their struggles like we do.
Mm-hmm. I think kind of how the church works in my mind is like, you obviously live in your home, you use your home, but whenever people come over, you want it perfectly clean, and you want it to look like some model home that people are like coming into, and they're like, oh my goodness, your house is fabulous. But then after they've come over a couple times, you're like, oh, I forgot to do the laundry, there's a little bit on the couch or something like that. We didn't sweep today, sorry, I have dog hair all over the floor. I think a lot of Christians are the same way, whereas they want people to feel invited and they want people to feel like it's a perfect fit for them. And we show that instead by sharing our struggles. I think a lot of time we try to seem perfect, so that way they want to be there. No.
Yeah, and I'm like trying to like navigate your own like feelings of like, okay, like that was really embarrassing. Do I want to bring it back up? But like knowing that, yeah, I can help somebody else and things. It like dies every single time. Like having to wrestle like with your own like dying to like, okay, it's embarrassing for me, but at the same time, it's not about me all the time. And making sure that we are making those connections and that it's not like this false idea that like when you come to the Lord, everything's gonna be great and it's wonderful and it's magical. Because that's not a biblical representation either. And so like you don't want like this doom and gloom of like, oh man, I'm always sad, or like not always sad, but like I'm like dwelling in this, and so it's not like I'm camped out here, I can't get past it, but let me take this experience and how I've grown from it and help you walk through it as well. And so, yeah.
Talking about it reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha. Am I right on that? And when, yeah, that's what I thought. And Jesus comes to their house, kind of in the same kind of example you were using of Jesus is coming over and, he's going to share a meal with them. And Martha's freaking out, trying to cook and clean and make sure that everything's spotless for Jesus. But Mary sits down and has a conversation with Jesus. And they're just sharing life. And finally, Martha just breaks down and says, Jesus, isn't this wrong that I'm over here doing all the work and Mary just gets to sit there and hang out and talk to you? Like, I feel like she should be helping me. And Jesus says that it's not about making everything perfect, and it's not about the cooking and the cleaning, but it's about sharing that time with each other and sharing that time with Mary and, making that connection. And it just kind of made me think of kind of at camp, I think. No, at Storm. We talked about, bringing people to the table and bringing people, even into your home to share a meal and share a connection. And even breaking that down of, we don't even need to bring them into our home. Like, even walking into the church, of a place where we all feel equals, even with other Christians. Are we sharing life with each other? Are we sharing in our struggles? Are we just kind of pretending like they don't exist and pretending like here everything's hunky-dory yet again? So I don't know, it just makes me think so much of the story of Mary and Martha, that it's not about making sure that everything looks right, but it's about making sure that connection is there, and making sure that we're not missing out on the opportunity in front of us. Martha was missing out on Jesus, who was sitting right there in front of her, but she was more focused in on, I gotta cook, I gotta clean, I've gotta do everything else. But the Savior is right there in front of you, and you just have to sit down and relax and have that conversation.
And that same, looking over, the prodigal son story again this past week, and, we talk a lot about, yes, it's about, the younger brother coming back and how, great that is, but there's, a different point of view I noticed, the same thing of, the older brother was but I've been working, I've been doing these good works, I've been working, notice that, and just completely missing, the relational aspect with his own father of, cool, yes, you've been working and you've been here, but we still haven't had this relational aspect. And so kind of that same idea of don't miss out on the relational when you're so focused on these other, yes, serving is part of our faith, but it's not that ultimate saving thing. I whispered again. No, I'm so sorry.
It's fine. Anything else? Any other thoughts? No? If you have any other thoughts, now's the time. I'm going to take both of you not saying anything as a no. So, I guess we will...
I don't know.
I guess we will wrap up this episode of Table Talk. Thank you for coming and joining us at the table. We talk... Each week so far, we've mentioned waiting excitedly to be able to meet together and to be able to share in this connection again. And this week, we just kind of talked about it a little bit different, of making connections. So this week, make sure that you're still staying with your relationships, that you're still connecting with your small groups, and that you're still sharing in life together, regardless of your struggles, whether they're the same, whether they're different, but making sure that we're all here together and that we're all, a part of this community, a part of this body of Christ. So, again, like I say every week, leave us down in the comments some topics that you may want us to touch on. Send me a text, send Tim a text. Nailed it. Send me or Tim a text just telling us what we could do better, how we could change things up. And what you would like to see from the podcast. Again, thank you guys for joining us. See you guys next week.